Link, Zelda and Ganon aren't the only ones whose designs change with almost every entry in the series. The enemy monsters that aim to defeat Link before he ever gets to the Grand Evil also have their appearances constantly updated whenever a new art direction rolls around. Today, I want to go through every single enemy this has happened to and pick which design suited them the best. Do keep in mind though that I will only include enemies where there's actually a clear difference to be discussed. For example, even though Buzz Blob have appeared in several Zelda games, including those with different art styles, it has changed so little that discussing it is just a huge waste of time. For the same reason, I will also not be including fire, ice, thunder and whatever other variants exist. With that said, let's kick things off with an enemy which is present in almost every single Zelda game, and yet doesn't feel remotely as recognizable or iconic as that fact suggests. Armos. These armored statues provide us with plenty of options to choose from, although most of them follow the same unspectacular train of thought. Weirdly enough, their official artwork for Ocarina of Time looks nothing like the Armos in-game, something that's fixed in Majora's Mask. However, my favorite is the odd one out of the group, its appearance in Skyward Sword. Suddenly, Armos is all vibrant and has a tribal inspiration, which is definitely a breath of fresh air in between all these colorless and lifeless statues. Vibrant is something Octoroks have always been, so that won't be the decider when looking at their options. Octoroks have seen all ends of the design spectrum, with the N64 games and Wind Waker going for a bit more realistic and threatening design, while games like Link's Awakening, Link Between Worlds and Skyward Sword are more bright and cartoony. My favorite though is Four Swords and Minish Cap, where we get a design that begins to border on cute even. Not many Zelda enemies can ever be considered cute, so that's definitely a nice change of pace for once, further strengthened by the lovely sprite work in these games. We continue with one of the series' most iconic enemies, the Lizalfos. They have received very heavy redesigns with each entry they appeared in, starting out as a sort of velociraptor holding a sword. In Twilight Princess, they became a full-on realistic abomination, while Skyward Sword gave them a bizarre arm cast made of stone. It wasn't until Breath of the Wild that Lizalfos finally got a design that I would say actually suit them, being much more streamlined with a chameleon-based design. It may not be what most people think of when they hear lizard anymore, but it's a definite improvement if you ask me. And while we're on Breath of the Wild supremacy, let's continue with some other enemies whose best iterations can be found in this game or its sequel, Tears of the Kingdom. First is the Lynel, whose previous appearances were mostly in sprite-based games that are too old to even properly compare. In Link Between Worlds though, we get a design that's less intimidating lion centaur and more goofy cat beast. There's really no discussion here as far as I'm concerned. Lynels look much better in the most recent version of Hyrule than they've ever done before. In a very similar position is the Gleeok. First, you again have the decades-old sprites, which are hard to even make out to begin with, and then came a goofy incarnation, hailing from Phantom Hourglass this time around. And yeah, Wind Waker's style is definitely gorgeous, but it doesn't suit enemies that are supposed to be intimidating. But Tears of the Kingdom on the other hand, now this is threatening. Just like the Lynels, Gleeoks had one hell of a glow up on the Switch, and while I wouldn't call the next entry such a massive upgrade, I do think they look better than ever in Tears of the Kingdom. I'm talking about the Likee, which have consistently had a fairly nondescript, tubular, parasite-like design ever since their introduction. Until Tears of the Kingdom that is, which gave them some necessary retouches to make them look as horrifying as that concept really is. They now have teeth, are significantly larger, and have a glowing mouth thing. Either way, this one is definitely the one I like best. Let's continue with a very similar enemy, albeit a desert dweller, the Leavers. They were originally supposed to be sandworm-like enemies, as can be seen in Ocarina of Time's artwork, but from Twilight Princess onward, they resemble a plant much more. Neither of these designs really excite me to be honest, but my favorite is probably the incarnations from Minish Cap and Link's Awakening, simply because this black and red color scheme looks dope. And with so little to go on, that's all it takes to win my vote. Another enemy that has not underwent too drastic design changes is the Keys, who are really just simple bats in every version of Hyrule. The amount of eyes changes, and they're a bit more goofy in Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, but that's about as far as it goes. I'd say my favorite is probably A Link Between Worlds, for very similar reasons as with the Octoroks. It's kinda cute. It moves me more than the kinda generic designs most games throw at us, so it gets to take home the gold medal. And let's tackle two more obviously animal-based designs while we're at it, beginning with the crow. While Breath of the Wild features these birds with realistic designs as the animals they are, crows appear in most games as enemies. Their design is quite consistent throughout the series, meaning the decision mostly goes between the common purple-beaked variant, this goofy one from Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, and the little blue one from Minish Cap. My preference goes to good old Purple Beak over here, but it's a tight call with not much between them. Another simple animal enemy is the rope, which is really just a bang average snake. This design switches a lot more between games, as we have the grey one from A Link Between Worlds, this purple version from Phantom Hourglass, a worm looking one from Link's Awakening, and this more intimidating sprite from Minish Cap. My favorite is even older though, it's this incarnation from the Oracle games. It looks so dopey here, it's very likable and goofy design. As we've seen before, I can definitely be a fan of that if it's well done, and when it comes to the rope, I think it looks nice. Time for some more iconic designs, so let's group the undead enemies together and go over those next. We're gonna start with the Gibo, which have often taken on a mummified appearance. In fact, in the N64 titles they're full on mummies, while in Twilight Princess and Tears of the Kingdom they feel more insectoid. Personally, I've always preferred the full-on mummy design, so my winner is Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which is actually a first for this video. We continue with their close affiliate the Re-Dead, which are more zombie than mummy. This is also the first enemy where we can consider the design used in Echoes of Wisdom, despite the game being yet to release at the moment of writing. That said, I don't really like it. It doesn't feel enough like a zombie to me, it's just a guy wearing a mask. Wind Waker also feels a little off with its strange proportions, and why do all these Re-Deads wear earrings? Anyway, my favorite is again the N64 games, with especially their designs from the 3DS remakes looking really good. Next in this camp we have the Stalfos, another often seen enemy. While none of its incarnations are too different, they are all just skeletons in essence, the level of weapon prowess differs greatly. Minish Cap Stalfos are naked as the day they died, while Ocarina of Time's version is fully armored out. While I was nearly swayed by Wind Waker's glorious ponytail, I feel like Skyward Sword's version strikes a perfect balance and is the most intimidating of all. And then there's also the Stall Children, who are fortunately not as messed up as their name suggests. Here, we have to choose between the goofy design from the N64 games and the more serious one from Twilight Princess. Now, I think the latter looks better, but it's so incredibly generic and predictable that I end up liking the goofy originals a lot more regardless, so Twilight Princess loses out once again. So how about we change that and give our favorite realistic Zelda a win for once? One enemy who peaked here was the Dark Nut, and they knew it since they tossed it in all the promo material. After white incarnations most commonly appeared in Wind Waker and Minish Cap, Twilight Princess brought us a true Dark Nut, and it looks really sick. This design has always been one of my favorite enemies in the series. It's such an intimidating yet sleek look. Another enemy that looks far better in this game than anywhere else is the Freezer. In the N64 games, Triforce Heroes and Spirit Tracks, it looks like a frozen head at best and like absolutely nothing at worst. But the Twilight Princess version has a cool dragon-like look to it that makes it a whole lot more monstrous. And speaking of monstrous, let's continue with a duo of Cyclopses, starting with the most famous of the two, the Hinox. In my opinion, these have been a tad too goofy throughout most of the series' life. In games like Link Between Worlds and Link's Awakening, they look more like wrestlers except with one eye, and I don't know what Phantom Hourglass is going for, but it doesn't work. Easily the best Hinox design can be found in Breath of the Wild, where they look like a serious threat. Even if they're not really all that difficult to beat, they at least now have a design befitting of what a Cyclops should be. There's also the Igore, which has had similar design philosophies throughout the series. Minish Cap and Four Swords Adventures go for more of a stone golem inspiration, while Link Between Worlds version is bright green and kinda reminds me of a gummy bear. By far the most intimidating, and thus the best in this case, is Majora's Mask though. This Igore is quite unsettling, there's something eerie about its design which works very well. And speaking of eerie, we have a lot more designs capable of giving the creeps to cover, like the Floor and Wall Master, which has always looked very creepy in the Zelda games on N64. However, there are also incarnations which are less scary hand and more just regular hand, like Link Between Worlds, Four Swords Adventures, and Triforce Heroes, which just ditches its eerie origins for something more mysterious, almost Sheikah-like. It's a strong design, but I personally prefer the creepy aesthetic from the Nintendo 64. That said, the absolute best is the version from the Wind Waker, as it combines both to create an ominous hand appearing from the shadows. Really cool. As a bit of an arachnophobe myself, by far one of the creepiest enemies in the series has always been the Skulltula. The version from Skyward Sword has always given me creeps the most, with Twilight Princess following shortly behind. On the other hand, the art style Phantom Hourglass really doesn't work for this enemy, and they honestly look kinda cute in Echoes of Wisdom as far as that's possible for a spider. But I think the originals from the N64 games are easily the best, looking both eerie but also kinda cool with how pronounced the skull motif is. That said, I wouldn't mind at all if we never see these enemies again. Small step from actual spiders to other creepy crawlies like the Tektites. These have also had a fairly consistent design all throughout the series, with most top-down Zelda games going for a simple blue look, while the 3D games switch it up more often. I'm not a fan of the color scheme in the N64 games, and the legs in Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks feel that too thin. They look like they break very easily. So I'd say the best design is Twilight Princess. The more realistic art style suits the relatively realistic design of the Tektites. The same cannot be said for the Moldorms, which look drastically different in Twilight Princess than in the rest of the games like Skyward Sword, Phantom Hourglass and sprite-based titles. And I'd say it really doesn't work. I can see what they were going for, but this design looks a bit too awkward in my opinion. I prefer the other games, which resemble actual centipedes a lot more. Let's give Phantom Hourglass the win, it hasn't had too many yet. Next up is the Bari, the jellyfish-like enemies who go from super simple in A Link Between Worlds to very complicated in Twilight Princess and the N64 games. I like the colorful ones from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask the best though, they're getting my vote. Another enemy with tons of different designs is the Beos. You've got the barely an enemy, more a structure from plenty of games like Breath of the Wild, Phantom Hourglass and Link's Awakening, but also this abomination from the N64 titles, which is a little much, even for me. Following in the footsteps of the Armos from earlier, my preference goes to the incarnation from Skyward Sword, which have a nice color scheme on top of their more modern structural design. Onto one of the series' most iconic enemies, so iconic in fact that it's easy to forget they didn't exist before the Wind Waker. But Goblins. In that game, they have a pirate-based design, while later games would turn them more into regular goblins. While I don't think any of these are too nice to look at, which is probably intentional, I would definitely say the Breath of the Wild version is the best. I especially like the more realistic pig ears, they add a lot. Small step from Goblins to Moblins, even when Moblins are a whole lot older. They started out as bulldogs, as can be seen in Ocarina of Time, but quickly became more pig-like, as seen in A Link Between Worlds and Link's Awakening. I don't know what Skyward Sword's variant is supposed to be, but I really don't dig it. It looks more clueless than dangerous. Breath of the Wild also has a very strange design for this enemy, which is much taller and lankier and has a long snout. My favorite though is probably the Wind Waker's variant. I feel like it has the most character and really stands out from the rest with its exaggerated features. We have some magic adjacent enemies to go next, starting with the Poes. They appear as collectibles with a nothing design in Tears of the Kingdom, but in earlier games their appearances varied a lot. The Nintendo 64 titles and Wind Waker go for a stylized yet mysterious entity, while A Link Between Worlds is full-on cartoony. And then you have Twilight Princess, which turns them into full-on realistic and terrifying ghosts. And honestly, I kinda like it. It's a stark departure, sure, but it's a really cool design nonetheless. They really nailed it, even if I do associate Pose more with something a tad more cartoony. Next is the Whiz Rope, which has also seen all ends of the spectrum. In Breath of the Wild they're more goofy than anything, while Triforce Heroes goes for full-on cartoon wizard. In Phantom Hourglass they may not be realistic, but they carry a scythe around, and in the Wind Waker they've been interpreted as colorful birds for some reason. And Majora's Mask goes for whatever this is. My favorite is Phantom Hourglass, I think. The scythe is too good to pass up on. Onto the Bubble, which is actually a flying skull, and while that is of course a quite limiting concept, there are still a lot of design differences here. For example, Wind Waker surrounds these enemies in colorful bubbles, while the N64 games and A Link Between Worlds opt for flames around the skull. Twilight Princess goes the literal route and gives them little wings, which looks kinda awkward if you ask me. I'd say Wind Waker is the best iteration of the bubble, this game's art style gives it a tad more character, which such a simple design definitely needs. 5 more enemies to go, beginning with the Deu Baba. Their designs have been pretty consistent all throughout the series really, with little differences. There are many enemies who can say they look nearly identical in the N64 games, Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, but it definitely applies to the Deu Baba. At last, Echoes of Wisdom is going for a completely different design, a lot less threatening, I don't really like it. My vote probably goes to Skyward Sword, simply because its colors are a tad more vibrant here compared to its nearly identical counterparts. Onto the Dodongo, which went from bipedal lizards in the N64 games to quadrupled geckos in Twilight Princess. And yeah, this is an easy one. The N64 originals look infinitely better, the gecko design is just really weird. We find these games squaring off again for the Wolvos, which have a more humanoid werewolf based design on the Nintendo 64 and look a lot like actual wolves in Twilight Princess. And then there's Spirit Tracks, where they're just the goofiest. My vote goes to Twilight Princess though, I love how threatening they are here. Second to last we have the Pead, floating plant enemies, which have a lot of different designs, but almost all are different interpretations of the same plants. As such, they all kind of blend together for me. I'd say the most pleasant to look at is probably the Wind Waker though. I like the color scheme of this one. The worst is definitely Twilight Princess, its colors are drabby and its design is clunky. And finally we have the Helmasaur, another enemy with wildly different designs. In Link's Awakening and A Link Between Worlds, they are defined by a green helmet over their head, which kinda looks like a rupee. However, in Majora's Mask, they look a lot more insectoid, which I don't think suits them. And then there's Twilight Princess. Here they look more like dinosaurs or rhinos, and it's not their head that's protected, but their backs. It looks really stupid if you ask me, but in a good way. So I was tempted to make this the final winner of the video, but in the end I think the green mask design is simply too sleek to skip out on. And that's it. The best design of every enemy in Zelda ever. Do you agree with my picks? What are your favorites? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Zelda content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.